Now it's my pleasure to welcome this morning's guest, Mike Collier, the Democratic candidate for Texas Lieutenant Governor. In his second run for statewide office, Mr. Collier defeated a lone opponent in the March primary and will face the Republican incumbent Dan Patrick in the November general election. In 2014, as his party's nominee, Mr. Collier lost a race for Texas comptroller to Republican Glenn Hegar. A former oil company CFO and one-time partner at Pricewaterhouse Coopers, one of the world's largest accounting firms, Mr. Collier is a native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He has an undergraduate degree and an MBA from the University of Texas at Austin. Please note, we have made several overtures to Lieutenant Governor Patrick to sit for an interview this fall. To date, he has rebuffed my advances. That is something we have in common. If we have nothing else in common, we're both getting no Dan Patrick action at the moment. However, I am keeping at it and at him. For now, please join me in welcoming Mike Collier. Mr. Collier, hello, sir.
Very good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Appreciate
everyone.
you being here.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you. So I want to start with the oldest, or one of the oldest cliches at election time, and that is that people don't vote against something, people vote for something. People want something affirmative to vote for. And so I want you to tell me why you want to be lieutenant governor, and your answer cannot contain the words Dan Patrick.
I'm delighted to answer that question without saying Dan Patrick's name, because we have a lot of important things to talk about, so we don't even have to talk about Dan Patrick.
Well,
First
we will.
of all,
Spoiler, we will, but not now. Not now.
well, let's take it in order. First of all, public education. All right, so our schools are not performing up to our expectations. We need to have excellent public schools, and we don't. So
Right.
we have to solve that problem. Second, property taxes. Property taxes are unfair, too high, and they aren't producing the revenues that we need for public education. Third, health care. We have a huge health care problem that manifests itself in many ways, but we need to expand Medicaid. It's a good deal, and we should have done that a long time ago. Fourth, this notion with pre-existing conditions, that's a huge issue. If you're a Texan with pre-existing conditions, you could lose your health care. Fifth, gerrymandering. We need to kill gerrymandering, because gerrymandering is killing democracy. And when we solve that problem in Texas, the rest of the country will follow. And finally, compassion. Compassion is missing in public policy. And we all feel it, and we need to bring compassion back.
Right.
So that's what you get with Mike Collier, and Dan Patrick is the exact opposite.
You just said
every
his
one of
name.
those. Sorry. My opponent is the exact opposite of each of those.
I mean, you're not following instructions off the bat here, Mr. Collier. Come on, man.
I need more coffee.
I was going to say to you, what is it that you want to accomplish in a job, but you've told me that. What I did not
Right.
hear was the kind of soaring rhetoric of a generic type that would inspire people to vote for you or for any other candidate. When you ask people why they're running for office, what you often hear back is some more broad theme about the need to do public service or the importance of our state, and instead you just went right to the gut and talked about issues. Do you not have any soaring rhetoric for us?
No, I'll leave the soaring rhetoric to others.
Okay.
I mean, this is what I've been doing from the beginning. When I ran for comptroller in 2014. Right. And by the way, when I ran for comptroller, it was the same, roughly the same. When I ran for comptroller, I've never held office. I called the party and I said, we have a problem with public education, we have a problem with property taxes, we have
Right.
a problem with this, problem with that. And the party said, yeah, come on, let's go.
So you wanted to get at it on the issues. I guess the point about
Yeah.
politics, and especially today, is that people are looking for inspiration. People are looking to be moved to take action. I read this morning in the Houston Chronicle, based on something in the Washington Post, that Texas has, over the last 4 election cycles, the dead last turnout of all states in the midterm elections. If that is going to change ever, it is going to be changed in part through voters being inspired to participate civically. You got nothing for that? You got nothing for anybody on that? On the inspiration front?
Oh, I think when Texans find out that somebody's going to solve
I'm
this public
tossing you a life
education
preserver
problem.
here, buddy. Come on.
When Texas, no, I'm not going to take the bait, Evan. When Texans find out there's somebody's going to fix the school funding problem, they listen
Right.
very, very carefully.
That's
This is
inspiring
Texas.
in and of itself.
By the way, I'm tired of nonsense in politics. I've viewed this from the beginning as an experiment. I don't like nonsense. I mean, I'm an accountant. Let's solve some problems. I mean, that's actually, I'm going to flip it on you, buddy. That's what's missing in politics.
Too much inspiration is the problem with politics.
We got to solve problems, and that's what I do. That's my shtick. And guess what? As I run around the state and talk about it, the response is fabulous.
I cited your work history. You started out, I think your first job was at Exxon, right?
Right.
You were a CFO of an oil company successfully. You were at Pricewaterhouse for a long time. let me step back from your business experience and ask you plainly, why are you qualified to be lieutenant governor, which is acknowledged to be the most important, or one of the most important, and the most powerful, or one of the most powerful jobs in the entire state of Texas, more so even than the governor? Why are you qualified for the job?
Because I can solve these problems, Evan. I can tell you, and I hope that we get into it because
we will.
Because I can solve these problems, because the answer is right before us. It's within our reach, and these are issues that matter deeply to the state.
Right.
If you think about it, we've got our children, 5.3 children in public education, are going to come out of our system without a decent education. Now, how are they going to find a job? What's that going to do for us in terms of our economy? Property taxes can't keep going up. I mean, people are in Austin. People can't live in their homes anymore. I mean, this is just absurd. What's happening?
So your qualifications are that you have solutions.
Exactly.
Right. But do you have experience? Do you have any experience? Do you have knowledge of it? I mean, I was interested when the conversation, we'll come back later in the conversation to this question of the debates or the lack of debates between you and your opponent. I didn't say his name just now either. We asked Alan Blakemore, who was the strategist for Lieutenant Governor Patrick, about why he wouldn't debate you, and his exact quote was, or part of his quote was, "Our opponent shows no signs of grasping even the basic rudiments of state government."
Well, he's full of hooey. He's completely full of hooey. Right. Nobody believes a word that feller says.
Do you understand, but do you understand state government?
No, I want to go back, I'll answer that question directly, but I want to say one thing. You talk about going out there and saying, well, I'm qualified and I can do this and I can do that. Well, Dan Patrick's been in the game. Oh, I said his name, didn't I? He's been in the game for 12 years. And he ran in 2006 and he said, I'm going to bring down property taxes. Now, what do you think happened to property taxes? They went up. So he runs for re-election in 2010. He says, I'm going to reduce property taxes. And what do you think happened? They went up. Then he runs for lieutenant governor. He says, I'm going to reduce property taxes. And they went up more than they've ever gone up. I mean, Dan Patrick looks at a problem the way a pig looks at a watch. He doesn't grasp it. So why do we think that that's useful leadership?
But what does that have to do with your qualifications for this job? I'm going to keep you on focus here. What about your what makes you qualified to do this job?
The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over, expecting a different result.
Right.
If we hire Dan Patrick thinking anything will change, that would be insane.
So Alan Blakemore is wrong. You do understand the rudiments of state government. You feel
I know
like
it so well that he doesn't have the huevos to debate me.
Okay, so let's come back. Let's stay with that issue then about what you know about state government, because I want to take this seriously and give you an opportunity to knock this down. I thought I would ask you some questions about the lieutenant governor job and about the legislature, kind of like a game show.
Please do.
Let's call this game show, Are You Smarter Than Alan Blakemore? How about that? When I asked you 5 questions about state government, let's see on the premise that you do indeed understand the rudiments of state government. Number 1, how many Texas senators are there?
31.
Correct.
Thank you.
Number 2, how many senators does it take to bring a bill to the floor for debate?
19.
Correct. Number 3, do tax bills originate in the House or the Senate?
I don't know.
Okay, we'll pass on that one. Number 4, how many special sessions can the lieutenant governor call?
0.
Because?
Because only the governor can call a special session.
Good, it was a trick question and you got me, that was good. 5.
However, the lieutenant governor can demand one.
Well, and he has.
But only the governor
and he has in the past. 5, what percentage of the legislature does it take to override a veto by the governor?
I don't know, I'm going to guess 2/3.
That was a good guess, correct. Okay, 4 out of 5 seems to me to be passing, so I'd say you prove that you do
one
know
that I
at least
didn't
the
know
rudiments of
is
state
highly
government.
inconsequential, but anyway.
Do tax bills originate in the House or the Senate? I would argue with you about the inconsequential nature of that particular question, but let's move on.
I'd love to have somebody to debate with. Let's debate. Let's do it.
Well, you have me right now. You understand the political circumstances in the Texas Senate, do you not, Mr. Collier? If you were to be elected as a Democrat, as lieutenant governor, you would be leading a Senate that would almost certainly, after 2 nights ago, be supermajority Republican. As a practical matter, if you were elected to lead the Senate, how could you function as the presiding officer of a body that was 2/3 Republican?
Well, first of all, we don't know how many Republicans and Democrats are going to be in that Senate because there's a lot of really good races, and I'm campaigning with some really good people that are running for Senate. Right? Rita Lucido, a friend of mine in my part of town. Stephen Kling in San Antonio, strong person. Beverly Powell up in Fort Worth. Nathan Johnson up in North Texas.
You're bullish on the chances of the Democrats winning more seats than most of us assume?
Kendall Scudder, the Lincoln of East Texas. we're campaigning together,
Yeah.
and so I'd like to see more of us in there.
You think it's an open question as to how many Democrats are going to be?
I don't think we have any idea how many Democrats and how many Republicans.
But let's assume that you have a Republican majority. I mean, right now it's 21-10. You guys would have to win back a whole bunch of seats for it not to be a Republican majority, leaving aside the question of a supermajority. So what do you do as the Democratic lieutenant governor who is presiding officer over a Republican Senate? As a practical matter, how do you lead the body?
So my expectations are that there's more moderate sentiment among senators than they are allowed to express because their leader is Dan Patrick. In other words, I've been working on this for 5 years. I've traveled the state. I've talked to Democrats. I've talked to independents. I've talked to Republicans. We're far more alike than we are not alike. And so the problem, I've always said, is not Republicans in the Senate so much as it is leadership. Let's take public education as a perfect example. The vast majority of Texans want to see us have great public schools because they know the consequences if we don't have great public schools.
Well, who's against having great?
Republicans.
But who's against great public? I mean, the thing about that is, who's against great public schools?
Dan Patrick's against great public schools.
Would Dan
He's
Patrick
hostile to
say
public
I'm
education.
opposed to great public schools? No, he would say I'm for great public schools.
Well, he would say whatever he has to get elected. I think that's pretty obvious. You can't trust a word that Dan Patrick says. You can't trust a word that he says.
You were so enthusiastic about hitting your opponent by name that you knocked your microphone off there. We're going to get that
I'll
fixed.
just sit here like this. Is that okay?
Okay. Well, Charlie will come help you get that fixed.
No, Dan Patrick is hostile to public education. There's no question about it. Look what he did to funding. Look what he did to funding. Look what he did to retired teachers.
You think a change in leadership in the Senate would give you an opportunity to work with both Democrats and Republicans?
Yes.
Give you the opportunity. So.
Yes.
Would you be willing, if there's a Republican majority in the Senate, to appoint committee chairs as lieutenant governor proportionate to the party breakdown of the Senate?
So remember what I said, the 5 things that I want to do?
Yeah.
We'll appoint committee chairs and do the rest to achieve those 5 things. And so we'll see. We'll see what the landscape looks like. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to go in there and we're going to solve the public education problem by funding it. We're going to close the big corporate property tax loophole because that's where the money's going to come from. Get a vote on expanding Medicaid, get a vote on killing gerrymandering, get a vote on absolute protections for pre-existing conditions, and we'll organize the Senate however is needed to accomplish that objective.
So if Republican committee chairs would not move legislation at your direction in those areas, you would have Democratic committee chairs?
Absolutely.
So you're talking about what is potentially a Republican majority Senate with committees chaired by Democrats?
Could very well
That is
come
the
to pass.
Collier plan for leading the Texas Senate?
No, the Collier plan is to achieve those 5 things.
Right.
And then we'll appoint a committee assignments appropriately.
As a practical matter, is that going to be possible? You're going to have guys, it's going to be like Braveheart. They're going to be coming at you in revolt.
Well, I think there'll be some that don't like the fact that I get elected.
Some?
However, imagine what it means to every politician in the state when I beat Dan Patrick. Because think about it, this is a referendum. There is no mistaking this. This is a referendum on the future of public education. This is a referendum on the future of property taxes. This is a referendum on the future of democracy and gerrymandering. When I beat Dan Patrick, that's because the will of Texas is obvious, and every single legislator, including Republicans, will recalibrate their thinking.
Let me ask you one more procedural thing before we get into these issues, and that is, would you be looking to reinstate the 2/3 rule, which went away a couple sessions ago at Dan Patrick's initiation, to require that 21, rather than, as you correctly identified, 19 votes be required to bring a bill to the floor for debate?
Well, I would say, again, I'm going to repeat, the first order of business is to accomplish those 5 things, and we'll do what we must to do those 5 things, because that's what, if I win, that's because that's what Texans want me to do.
But could you
However,
not,
what I'd like to do is leave the Senate in a better state than I would find it. And I actually do believe that you should allocate committee assignments across both parties. I do think that the 2/3 rule is not a bad idea. It protects the lieutenant governor as surely as it protects voters, if you think about it. I mean, the reason why Dan Patrick is in so much trouble is because he has taken the Senate beyond where Texans can tolerate. So I'd like to leave it in better shape than I found it. However, I'm on a mission to solve these problems.
Right.
And so we'll deal with the problems first, and then we'll do that second.
I want to get into the issues, and you've tried to lead me over to public education and taxes, and I swear I've got a whole bunch of questions, but I've got to ask you something, because you just said something. You just said Dan Patrick's in trouble.
Yeah.
What evidence is there, Mr. Collier, that Dan Patrick is in trouble?
Polls?
What are you seeing that the rest of the world does not see?
Polls?
This is like an M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Polls? Now, there's polls that have us in single digits, mid-single digits.
You really believe Dan Patrick is at risk of, I mean,
Oh, I have no doubt.
You tweeted something within the last 24 hours that you were on the cusp of being lieutenant governor. My reaction was, of which state? I mean, I do wonder, I mean, I know that it is the job of the candidate to be optimistic and to be positive about his campaign, but when you say Dan Patrick is in trouble, I'm just wondering, beyond campaign rhetoric, what evidence there is that he's in trouble.
All right, so if you wish to ignore the polls, which I'm happy to do for the moment, let me just share with you how 2018 looks compared to 2014. Because I swam in this river in 2014, and I swam against a very, very hard current. This time, I'm swimming with a very, very hard current, because what's happening that you guys aren't reporting on, and the pundits don't grasp, but I'm living it, is that we have lots and lots of very, very high quality down ballot candidates who are supported, who are energized, who are making politics very local. And by the way, you know, after the 2014 election cycle, the Democrats asked me to stay involved, and they asked me to analyze.
Right.
What do we need to do to start winning statewide? And I did that work, and I came back, which is why I got invited to keep running. And I did that work, and I came back, and I said, here's the answer. The answer to winning statewide is two things. We have to remind people that we have a point of view on economic matters, kitchen table issues. That's my bag, right?
Right.
Uninspiring as it may seem to some. We have to campaign strong on issues that matter in people's lives. Second, we need down ballot candidates, because this is a huge state. You know, you can't expect a star, a rock star or otherwise, at the top to carry it. What really will drive Democrats to the polls are down ballot candidates, such as Colin Allred, such as Joseph Copster, such as all the Senate candidates that I discussed, and hundreds of others. And that was my recommendation to the party back in 2015.
Right.
Then I stepped away from it, and I said, well, now how are we going to do that? How are we going to solve that problem? Because it's hard enough to encourage people to put their hand up and say, I'm going to run for office.
Of course, the party fielded down ballot candidates, Mr. Collier, in 2014, and they all lost by 20 points.
Well, nothing like we've seen this time.
So you think you think that the quality of candidates this time is better, and you think the political environment is more favorable in 2018? I think that's probably inarguable, that the political environment is more favorable for Democrats in 2018 than 2014.
You have, and the reason why we're close in the polls is no fluke. The reason why we're close in the polls is because of all of that down ballot energy, and we're campaigning on kitchen table issues.
Right.
And I, you know, coming into this, I didn't know how we were going to solve this problem. How do you get people to run? But Trump solved it for us, right? And I don't even need to get into the politics of Donald Trump. All of them is just a statement of fact. The Democrats reacted to Trump winning, and good people like Copser and Colin Allred, who aren't politicians, just ordinary Texans, have said, okay, I'm worried about my country, I'm going to run, and I don't care how long the odds are, and that's how we will do well.
Let's acknowledge that candidate recruitment this year has been better for Democrats than it has been in some cycles, for sure. Let's talk about issues. I want to talk about the issues that you talked about, and I want to talk about some of you did not talk about. On public education, you have talked at various points during this campaign about ending vouchers. That is your position, correct?
Absolutely.
About ending high-stakes testing?
Modifying it. We should have a
Well, the word on your
system.
website says end. It says end high-stakes testing.
Repeal and
end
replace.
or modify it?
Repeal and replace.
Repeal and replace.
The system that we have now is a disaster. We do need to measure. However, it needs to make sense. When teachers say, I like this metric system because it helps me teach, then I'll say, okay, this is a good system.
Right. But beyond that, you're in sync with the trend over the last couple of sessions of reducing the number of end-of-course exams and taking this idea that we're going to teach to a test or take time away from classroom teaching in favor of testing. You're in sync with that idea.
Yeah, and let me tell you why, too. And it's not just, I mean, if you talk to parents and if you talk to students and if you talk to teachers, you all hear that they think it's a disaster. But I also talk to college professors and I talk to employers. And what's happening in Texas is critical thinking skills are collapsing. I mean, they are collapsing, and there's more than one reason, but teaching to the test is a huge part of it. So we're going to be in a soup. Not only are we providing a disservice to our young people, but in terms of the jobs that we'll be creating in 5 and 10 and 15 years, you need critical thinking skills.
So what do you do about accountability, Mr. Collier? If you take testing out of the general regimen of public education in the way that you're describing, how do you know whether public education is doing a good job or a bad job?
Well, I hadn't described it yet, so now I'll describe it. I think what we, first of all, this testing regime that we see now appears to me to have been designed by lawyers and lobbyists and politicians and people who have never stood in a classroom. I hear that everywhere I go. So when we design a system, it should be designed by people who know what they're doing, right? So these need to be designed by people who have stood in a classroom and understand how children learn and how students. So that's the key. Is ask the right people to design this. And it actually, the problem with public education goes beyond just this. The whole operation, the leaders of our public education infrastructure aren't teachers necessarily. I mean, you look at it. Let me give you an example. If you go to Exxon, I know Exxon well, right? So I worked there for many years. They were a client of mine. You go into Exxon and you go to the executive suite. And one thing you know about everybody in that room, they all know how to drill oil wells. Say what you will about it. So you go into public education and you look at the leaders at the very top. Have they ever stood in the classroom? Do they have the slightest idea what they're doing?
Mr. Collier, define the top. Who are you referring to in that case?
Morath. And the top leaders in TEA.
Right.
Right?
Mr. Morath's service as a board member of the Dallas Independent School District does not qualify him as somebody grounded in education?
Did he teach?
So the requirement in the Collier universe would be that the head of the TEA must be a classroom teacher or a former classroom teacher?
Well, I'm going to give you a little lesson in civics. The lieutenant governor doesn't select the leader of the
Well,
TEA.
that wasn't on my quiz. I know that.
But
you're
we're
expressing a
tied.
point of view about it. You held a door open. I'm going to walk through it.
It doesn't sound like you understand the rudiments of government.
I do, and I'm not asking to debate anybody. That's good. Mr. Collier, you talk on your website about investing in pre-K. You've talked out on the campaign trail about investing in pre-K, about increasing compensation for faculty at these public schools. I also know that you've talked about the need to invest more money in public education generally. How are you going to pay for it? Where's the money going to come from?
First, I'd like to tell you where I think the money needs to go. Is that okay?
Sure.
Why don't we take it in order?
Sure.
We need to put more money in public education. I think there's no question. And I get hit from my Republican friends. They say, oh, you Democrats, all you ever want to do is throw money at problems. No, let me just walk you through a couple of things. If we had smaller class sizes, so that we had 22 students in a class, and if we had the right number of special education teachers, then our teachers could teach and our children could learn. And if we invested in pre-K, we'd solve one of the biggest problems that we have, which are children who are born to very difficult circumstances. Now, you do those three things, which are expensive, suddenly, immediately, our performance in public education improves dramatically. I don't mean to exclude compensation for teachers when I do my rundown. Actually, when I talk about putting more money in public education, I used to start by saying we should give our teachers a raise, but teachers have said to me, don't start there. First, let me be a teacher. But then I say to them, but we do need to give teachers a raise because we need to make teaching a career of choice. And so they have to be attracted to it, or otherwise we don't get the best and the brightest, and then we also have to solve the retirement problem, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Now, where's the money going to come from?
Yeah.
That's the key. Where's the money going to come from? I'll tell you where it won't come from, is higher property taxes on homeowners, because we're getting killed by Republicans who have raised our property taxes and lied through their teeth about it. That's not where the money's going to come from.
Well, we'll come to that statement you just made in a second, but tell me where is the money coming from?
So there is a loophole that is exploited by the owners of large commercial industrial properties, and everybody knows about it. It's called the Equal and Uniform Loophole. It was first passed in 1997. Very well aware of the problem when Perry was governor. There's been legislation proposed many times to close this loophole. The owners of large commercial industrial properties are able to cheat the system, and they do.
This is $5 billion.
$5 billion. Well,
right.
$4 billion was the one time it was calculated comprehensively was in 2006
right.
by the large appraisal districts. They said $4 billion is missing. Inflation would now suggest that it's $5 billion. Right. Nobody knows exactly what the number is.
So you want to raise taxes on business to pay for more public education?
Raising taxes is not in this.
But if you're talking about businesses paying more by closing a loophole,
this is enforcing the law.
You are raising taxes, period.
No, this is enforcing the law.
If you're a business owner and you pay more taxes as a consequence of this loophole closing, you have effectively raised the taxes on business. I mean, if you want to do it, just say that's what you want to do.
I will address that directly, but first, let me just say this. The Constitution says that if you have a property subject, and this is the Texas Constitution, if you have a property that's subject to taxation, it'll be valued at market value, which is why your house is at market value, your house is at market value, right. My house is at market value. But if you own a refinery or a petrochemical complex or a downtown skyscraper, despite the fact that the Constitution compels it to be valued at market, it is not valued at market. It is unlawful what they're doing, and all I'm suggesting is that we are enforcing the law. This is a law enforcement matter. Now,
but is the loophole legal?
Well, in my opinion,
was the loophole passed by the legislature? Is this loophole legal? Businesses that are not paying what you believe to be the correct appraisal value, they are paying that incorrect value in your mind legally, right?
No. In my opinion, it's unlawful. Austin sued. Right. It's rigged against you. You can't do anything. I mean, Austin sued because it's illegal, but it was thrown out because they don't have standing.
But you're not willing to stipulate that closing a loophole And the result of that loophole being closed is that businesses are paying, by your estimation, $5 billion more in taxes is not, in fact, an increase in taxes on business?
This is precisely what I'm saying. When you enforce the law, businesses will put more money in. I'm not raising their taxes. I'm requiring them to pay what they're supposed to pay.
Will
now,
any business that pays more taxes not think you've raised their taxes?
I don't care what they think. We're going to go and enforce the law. Now, let's deal honestly with this. That means that big corporations have to kick in more money. Big corporations have to kick in $5 billion more money. We must do that. Otherwise, we're being ripped off.
So that's your investment.
Then you're going to say, well, Mike, that's going to kill jobs. I hope that's your next question. I'd love to talk about that.
I'm not even getting there because I don't believe that this legislature is going to close that loophole. I mean, I'm not doing fantasy baseball here. I mean,
oh no, well then go back and read the Legislative Budget Board 2016, the GEAR report. Government, surely you're well versed in the rudiments of government to know about the GEAR report.
I'll ask Alan Blakemore to walk up the street with
Surely Alan Blakemore knows the GEAR report. It was in 2016.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all sorts of evidence and analysis, but even the Legislative Budget Board in 2016 said that we have a loophole.
Right.
They calculated it for a select group of school districts. There's no mistaking it.
So the $5 billion that you're talking about, just to move on here from this, the $5 billion you're talking about, that is the money that you would put into public education to do all the things you're talking about.
Correct.
And that's as much as you think you need.
So so in my first term as Lieutenant Governor, I shall do one thing and one thing only as it relates to taxes, and that's that. Why? It's very well documented. Everybody knows about it. It's corrupt. They aren't paying their taxes. It's unlawful what they're doing. It's $5 billion, and what that'll do is give Texans a taste of honest leadership.
You think the legislature would go anywhere near closing that loophole?
Well, the beauty of it is that you get 2 sessions, right? If you're Lieutenant Governor, you get 4 years, you get 2 sessions.
You don't try it, you don't get it the first time, you try it in the second.
There's more to it than that, my friend. If they vote no to keep that, any senator, and I hope they're all listening, any senator who votes no to closing that loophole, then I'll chase them right back into their districts between sessions and make sure that everybody in their district knows that they voted to keep that loophole open, which caused their property taxes to go up and caused school funding to go down. That's the power of the Lieutenant Governor.
Let me move you over to property taxes. You have been in a bit of a tiff fight with some Republicans, including the Lieutenant Governor, but also the comptroller, over a claim that you have made more than once that this is your exact quote, Dan Patrick raised school property taxes more than 26% during his term in office. That's a statement you stand by?
26.88%.
You stand by that?
I do.
We don't have a statewide property tax. How did the Lieutenant Governor raise property? This gets back to rudiments of government stuff. How can you claim Dan Patrick raised property taxes when there is no statewide property tax and the Lieutenant Governor cannot raise property taxes?
So let's start with the budget itself. Why don't we just read the budget for a second? As an accountant, I tend to do things that way. Read the budget. So for those that are listening,
Article 2, page 5, note 3. Right?
Yes, but also therein, paragraph 2 and sentence 2 thereof. Go to the state, Article 3, page 5, note 3, paragraph 2, sentence 2 reads, state budget. Property values, comma, and the estimate of local tax collections on which they're based, comma, shall be increased 7.04% in tax year 2016, which is fiscal 17, as those who understand the rudiments of government would know, and 6.77% in 2017, which is fiscal year 18. And what that does is it tells everybody this is how it works. Now let's talk about how it works in practice. Because what happens is the state sends out economists and they figure out, okay, how much higher our property value is going to go. And property values always go up because it's Texas. And then they assume that there's no change in the tax rate. And then they estimate how much money is coming in for schools from local property taxes. And when they have that number, they figure out how much less state money they put in. And then they make darn sure they hit that first number. Now, they don't collect that 7.04%, but they make darn sure that the school districts do. And how they do it, they do 2 things. There's one thing, which is the comptroller does. And he does it, no, I'm not criticizing the comptroller here. The comptroller needs to do this because there are a lot of things that hang on it and make sure it's done right. But, however, the comptroller goes into the appraisal districts and makes darn sure that everybody's appraisal goes up with market. So you start with that. Then the Texas Education Agency says to school districts, do not lower your rates. And there's a letter that they sent.
So you think they're reverse engineering this to meet a target?
I think there's absolutely no question.
Right. You have interpreted that shall be, this is where part of the rub is here, this phrase shall be increased that's in the state budget language. You interpret that to be a mandate Or that the intimation of that is that it's a mandate.
Well, why in the world doesn't it say shall not exceed?
Well, I take it up with the people who write the language in the budget. The practical impact, though, is you're saying it's a mandate.
It's a mandate.
Well, Glenn Hegar disagrees as the comptroller. He says, his exact quote is, "Dishonesty for the sake of political gain won't solve this issue. Mike Collier should be ashamed of himself," the way he interprets this. But no less a constitutional conservative as Bud Kennedy of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram also called you out on this on Sunday on television. He said, "You are reading this as a mandate. It is not a mandate. It's a prediction. It's an acknowledgement of reality, but it is not a requirement."
It's a mandate. It's a mandate, and this is nonsense. And let me tell you something. I travel the whole state, and the fact that Bud Kennedy doesn't get it, the fact that Blakemore doesn't get it.
Well, that may be something that you and Dan Patrick both agree on. That Bud Kennedy doesn't get it. That may be the one.
The fact that you're struggling with it doesn't surprise me.
Well, I'm not struggling with it. I'm asking you to tell me how the state raises property taxes when there's no statewide property tax. It's a pretty simple question.
Well, we just answered it, Evan. I mean, they make darn sure that we collect that money, and everybody knows it. Now, you go talk to every county commissioner in the state. You go talk to every school board trustee in the state. You talk to every superintendent in the state. They will tell you Mike has it exactly right. Next thing you know, Dan Patrick's going to say our property taxes are going down. I mean, he thinks we're that stupid.
Well, you're making a political argument more than an economic argument. Can we make that point?
No, it's an economic argument. There's no question about it.
You stand by the idea that Dan Patrick has raised property taxes.
Oh, yeah, and let me explain why. Why do they do it? We should talk about what's the root cause. What's the root cause of the problem? The root cause of the problem is the state's running out of money. The state can't pay its bills. Why can't the state pay its bills? I'm going to reconcile the accounts for you. We'll see if anybody who's concerned about the rudiments of government has an interest in this. Here's the reason why we're running out of money. Because the legislature did three things, very consequential. First, in 1991, they froze the motor fuel tax at 20 cents a gallon. Texas A&M Transportation Institute tells us today that there's $4 billion structural deficit to maintain our highways.
And you would increase that tax.
I'm coming back to what we will do and not do.
Yeah.
Second, 1997 is the Equal and Uniform Law that I'm talking about, that owners of large commercial industrial properties.
That's the $5 billion.
That's $5 billion. Third, in 2006, we created the margin tax, got rid of the old franchise tax, and the comptroller at the time said that that would create a $5 billion deficit, which has since been widened to $6 billion because we reduced it. 4 plus 5 plus 6 is $15 billion that we've blown in our revenue systems. But wait, there's more. When you blow holes in your revenue systems and you can't make ends meet, you have to start borrowing money. And we have been borrowing money like gangbusters. School districts owe $120 billion. The state owes $100 billion. The first $6.4 billion in taxes collected locally is for interest
debt service.
In debt service at the school district level, and then the state pays $2 billion. Now add all that up, 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 6.4 plus 2, $23.4 billion missing, right. And the state can't make ends meet, and the only place they can turn is homeowner property taxes, and they can do it because values go up, and they launder that money through school funding, and there's no mistaking it. And here's what this means about who ought to be the next lieutenant governor. We cannot solve these problems until we reverse those decisions. And all this other talk about roll back and the rest of that, that's just smoke and mirrors.
So then you would increase the gas tax.
I would do one thing.
Right.
I would do one thing, which is the second of those issues.
The $5 billion.
The $5 billion, close the equal and uniform loophole because it's well documented. It's just enforcing the law. It's a big number, and it'll give Texas. Now let's go back to transportation at 20 cents a gallon. There's a number of reasons why I don't want to run in here and say, well, we ought to raise that. Partly because the whole system's going to have to change, perhaps within the next 5 years, because electric cars is changing everything. So it doesn't make any sense to have a big, fisticuffs over that 20 cents a gallon, because we're going to have to rethink transportation infrastructure because we're not going to be using motor fuels. We're going to be using electricity.
Okay.
So just that one thing,
right,
and that'll give Texans a taste of honest leadership.
Let me ask you, let me jump to a couple of other topics here before we talk a little bit of politics at the end and then go to questions. On immigration, I'm interested to see your positions on immigration. You support a path to citizenship, you support a guest worker program, but this was a phrase I've heard you utter and know that also is on your...
I don't know that I've said I've supported a guest worker program.
It's right there on your website, Mr. Collier. MikeCollier.org, I believe, is the website.
Okay, thank you.
Here is something else on your website. Texas companies should hire Texans first.
Well,
that is on your website. Texas companies should hire Texans first.
Well, there's a big problem with wage theft.
Well,
we should.
but this is under the realm of immigration. This is part of your immigration discussion. I'm just wondering if you're for E-Verify for Texas businesses. Often there's a conversation about how politicians, especially in campaign season, complain about the number of people who are here undocumented and are taking jobs from Texans. But then you ask them, would you impose a requirement that private businesses use E-Verify to ensure that the people applying for jobs at those companies are documented? And they say, well, we couldn't mandate that on private business. When I hear you say Texas companies should hire Texans first, I wonder if you're calling for some E-Verify system on private businesses.
Well, I haven't studied E-Verify, so I don't know. I'm not going to answer it. I'm not going to fake it. What I'm saying is that when we think about, I'm supported by AFL-CIO, and I'm very proud of that. Because my job is to fight for working men and women in the state. I'm very proud of that. And I talk to labor leaders all day long, and they say one of the big issues is job theft and wage theft, and I think we should hire Texans first. I think that's fundamental. I don't know whether E-Verify is the right technical solution because I haven't studied it.
Do you think we have a problem of undocumented labor taking jobs from Texans?
I think we have a real problem with wage theft. So this is companies that are hiring, particularly in the construction trade. I hear this all the time. I was meeting with my friends in the Carpenters Union, and they said we have a big problem with wage theft where, if you hire an American, you've got certain rules that you've got to follow, but if you hire somebody who's not, then you can do all sorts of things to underpay them, not pay them the overtime.
So you're not advocating for you are advocating for not hiring people who are not documented citizens?
No, what I'm saying is, there's two issues here, right? We have people that are undocumented that live amongst us. That's a separate issue that we ought to talk about. As it relates to labor policies, I think that we should enforce the law, and I think you should hire Americans. You should hire Texans. I think that's fundamental.
On guns, which is a topic that is ever thus, right? We're always talking about this topic, but in Texas of late, this has become a particularly interesting and important discussion. You are for red flag laws.
Right.
You are for increased background checks for gun purchases.
What I'm for is background check systems that work. It's more than just increasing. It's a very complicated question, but we need background check systems that work because, we saw what happened. Let me put it to you this way. So when Sutherland Springs happened, that was the first time that I was ever confronted with what does one do if you're a leader.
Right.
And that's when I realized how bankrupt it felt to just say thoughts and prayers. And then I said, I'm not going to have something like that happen, and not having had the courage to do what's right. So I spent a fair amount of time thinking about what we should do in terms of gun safety and sensible gun laws. I have a lot of friends that are Republicans. I have a lot of friends that are Democrats. I've made a lot of phone calls.
You're a gun owner?
Thought deeply about it. I own the deer rifle that I bought when I was a kid.
Yep.
My dad and I used to go hunting. And then Santa Fe happened. And then I thought, well, that's it. If this election becomes a referendum on gun safety, so be it. Texans are ready. I'm ready. And here's what we need. And I talk to the Moms Demand Action folks. I'm their #1 fan. They come to all my events. I really feel strongly.
So what's the
about
Collier plan here?
Well, I think as relates to gun safety, we should do two things. And I'm pro Second Amendment, and I own a gun, but we should do two things. We should do background check system that works, which is very complicated, and we can talk about it, and red flag laws. Red flag laws are very simple, which is that you can act before and not after a crisis. The governor said it was worth considering when he did his roundtables. It was Dan Patrick who said no, but Texans are ready. Texans are ready for background check system that works and red flag laws.
Most Democrats would say that's pretty weak sauce. Not to be for or against those individual things or any position on this, but simply when Democrats talk about gun safety, they talk about banning high-capacity magazines. They talk about banning bump stocks. They talk about banning the sale of semi-automatic weapons. I don't hear you talking about those things.
Well, when this Democrat talks about it, this Democrat talks about background check systems that work and red flag laws.
So are you opposed to banning high-capacity magazines?
Well, I don't think we take that step. I think we do those two things. A big
So
part of
then
politics.
you are opposed to it?
No, what I'm telling you, Evan, is that I'm going to do two things.
Yeah, but I'm asking you
Lieutenant
about
Governor.
other things that Democrats traditionally take as articles of faith as it relates to gun safety. I'm simply asking you to say, are you for or are you against banning high-capacity magazines?
Well, presently, I'm not going to ban them. I'm not going to work to ban them.
Are
I
you
don't
for
support
banning
doing it.
the sale of automatic weapons?
No.
Are you for banning bump stocks? Are you for banning bump stocks?
Bump stocks is different. Bump stocks is different because that takes something that's illegal and makes it legal. You can't have a machine gun. That's old. That's old news. A bump stock takes something where you don't have an automatic weapon, makes it an automatic weapon. It seems to me that's elementary. But going back to that,
yes.
If we do those two things, background check system that work, red flag laws, the key is that that's politically doable in this state. Politics is the art of the possible, and that's the right thing to do. And I'm not pledging or committing or promising to do anything other than that. However, I do question whether or not high-capacity magazines is the right answer, and we ought to have a conversation around that.
Right.
That's about all I'm willing to say.
And you understand that that does put you on the opposite side of some Democrats on that issue.
No Democrat that I know has ever picked up the phone and called me and said they're unhappy with me.
Let me ask you.
Not sure it would matter.
Question of democratic values of being a Democrat. Why are you a Democrat, Mr. Collier? You famously supported Mitt Romney in 2012. You told me that the last time we sat down, did you not? You voted for Mitt Romney in 2012.
I did, yeah. So the evolution is as follows. First of all, we had a mayor in Houston that I really liked, Bill White.
Yep.
I mean, Bill White was a great. Y'all remember Bill White?
Yeah.
Bill White was everything I was looking for in a political leader. I mean, he was smart, he understood business, hard worker, honest, and had policies that were sensible. At the same time, we had Rick Perry as governor. And when I would sit and compare and contrast, I would say to myself, you know, Bill White is everything that I'm looking for in a political leader. Bill White's a Democrat, perhaps I am too.
Did you support Bill White over Rick Perry for governor?
I did.
You did.
I wasn't writing checks in those days,
but that's
I voted.
you voted. So that's 2010.
Yeah.
So then 2012 comes and you have the presidential race.
No, what came next that really was sort of the galvanizing is when I started to study, when I sat back and started to study, why was it that we cut public education back in 2011?
Right.
I was aware that we cut public education in 2011. I smelled a rat because we were told that we had a deficit coming, and I thought, now wait a minute. Property taxes pays for public education. Mine just went up. Now we're being told that we have a deficit and we have to cut public education. I began to suspect that we had a problem, and when I began studying it is when I decided that we do have a problem and that we aren't funding education properly, and we never will fund education properly without political competition, and that's about the time that Susan Combs was stepping down, and it was a no-brainer at that point. And I figured that we can't solve those problems. The Republicans aren't going to solve those problems. Republicans are taking us in a place that we don't want to go. Right. Democrats are for public education. That's when I called the Democrats, and that's when the conversion was complete.
But at the federal level, I'm going to come back to this, you voted for Mitt Romney. And my question is, why should Democrats? Well, but my question is, how come Democrats should look at you? Why would they have looked at you in 2014, and why did they look at you in 2018? This is an election cycle, especially in which God knows Barack Obama is not progressive enough for some Democrats in this election cycle. You voted for Mitt Romney. Why should an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or an Ayanna Pressley voter, who is more likely than not the Democratic Party voter of 2018, look at somebody who voted for Mitt Romney over Barack Obama in 2012 and go, that's my guy?
Well, if you share my passion for public education, if you share my passion for getting taxes right, if you think we should expand Medicaid, if you're concerned about pre-existing conditions, if you want to kill gerrymandering, and if you want to bring compassion back, then you vote for
So
me.
there's nothing to answer for as far as your past straying from the flock.
I answered it comprehensively. You don't understand the rudiments of politics either, do you?
Well, no, I understand that you voted for Mitt Romney. There's not much more to understand than that. Let me ask you about that. Manny Garcia from the Democratic Party is here, so I want you to look exactly at him when you answer this question. What is wrong with the Democratic Party in Texas at the moment? You were the finance chair for the state party, so you understand the guts of the operation, the engine under the hood. Democratic Party of Texas held a Texas Senate seat for 34 years until 2 nights ago, when a Republican, Pete Flores, was elected as the first Hispanic Republican to the Texas Senate. Does the Democratic Party have a problem? Is there a problem with this party that needs to be fixed? And look him in the eye when you say it.
Well, I would say two things. My reaction to that is two things. It's a wake-up call to Democrats. I mean, if you want Dan Patrick to be your next lieutenant governor, and if you want bathroom bills, and if you want vouchers and the rest, then don't set your alarm on Election Day. This is a real wake-up call for Democrats. But it also shows you that what Republicans are good at are manipulating the vote. What they aren't good at is policy.
How'd they manipulate the vote?
Well,
I saw Chairman Hinojosas quote after the election. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Republican special interests poured money into the race, denying the people of West Texas and the U.S.-Mexico border representation that shares their values. How'd they deny them that? They voted. They voted for the other guy. Sounds like they chose their values.
No, I think if you understand if you understand voter behavior and you want to make darn sure that everybody's sound asleep, you pick a Tuesday in the middle of September.
So you subscribe to the theory
November.
that the governor gamed this by picking a date when there'd be lower turnout so they could win, as opposed to making the special election say on Election Day.
What don't they game? They game everything.
Right. Right.
They gave him everything.
Well, he
So-
who has the most toys wins usually, right? Elections have
No,
consequences.
listen, when I compare the Democratic Party to 2018, see, I have the benefit of seeing both 2014 and 2018.
Right.
And what I see in 2018 is very different than 14 and much, much better. We have much better, higher quality down ballot candidates. We have a lot of money coming in to Democratic races, which is being invested where it should be, at the ground level, to mobilize Texans to the polls. We are much more coordinated than we were in 2014. It was every man for
So
himself.
you feel better about
Oh.
you feel better about the party in this election
Well,
cycle
you see
as
the
it
polls,
comes.
don't you? The polls are not a fluke.
Well, I have seen the polls in the statewide races, and while there are some people who are running better than candidates did 4 years ago, I still don't see any of the statewide races as being won by Democrats.
Oh, we're way better in. Oh no.
No, you're better.
Look, if
better is. I mean,
if you're five-
this is like the people who say to me, "Well, Congressman O'Rourke's only going to lose by 7 points. That's so great." And I think you don't know how this works. What do you call a Republican who wins by single digits? Senator. Right? I mean, the whole idea that you guys are saying that the good news is you're only going to lose by 7. That doesn't seem.
Here's what you're missing. Here's what you're missing. First of all, I think we're going to find that the polls are closer than 6, 5 or 6. But even if they are 5 or 6,
Yeah.
if you're 5 or 6 down in a poll where you call people at night, catch them on a landline, 500 people, and how are 8 million people or 6 million people going to vote? It's not going to be precise. If we're within 6 on November 6th,
It's winnable.
and Democrats turn out, what it means is if we're within 6, it's just a question of
Right.
who comes out. If Democrats come out, we win. If Republicans come out, we don't. So Democrats must come out,
Right.
and Democrats are going to come out, Evan. You saw in the primary, we
It's
doubled
a-
our performance in the
Yeah,
primary.
but you were still 500,000 votes behind the Republicans in turnout.
Well, if the ratio of primary to general holds even slightly, it makes a huge difference.
So before we go to questions, to this point about turnout and what it's ultimately going to take to win.
Right.
I said earlier that now, according to the Washington Post, Houston Chronicle reporting today, Texas has the worst voter turnout of the 50 states in the midterms. There is a question about turnout. At the end of the last quarter, according to Chuck's newspaper, Dan Patrick had 233 times as much cash on hand as you did. Those weren't Abbott Valdez numbers. You were better than that. But you were still 233. He had 233 times the money that you had. And then he won't engage with you. He won't debate. He's not giving you the opportunity to be elevated in the sense that a debate puts the major party challenger on the same platform and give him an opportunity. So what is the road ahead for the next 43 days for you?
Well, in
Under
reverse,
those circumstances.
in reverse order, he'll debate anything that moves. He's never failed to debate an opponent. He's even chased Geraldo Rivera up in New York, went and debate him. He just won't debate me.
What do you do about
because
that?
he knows that I have the issues.
What do you do about that? Can you win without him debating?
I think Texans may if he first of all, he should debate. I mean, he wants to be the most powerful position in the state. I mean, are we better off now than we were 4 years ago when he started? If you think about it, our schools have declined dramatically. Property taxes are up dramatically. Look at unemployment in the state. You know, we were 15th out of 50 states in terms of unemployment at the beginning of his term. We're now, I looked at it last night because I know that you would look at it. Go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We're now 29th out of 50 states. I don't know anybody who's saying, hey, this is working for us. And so that's why he won't debate.
I know a few people who say it's working for him.
And as it relates to money, his money's not going to help him, Evan. He spent $10 million in his primary. I mean, you can't put a shine on a turd. I'm sorry. He spent $10 million in his primary. Before he spent that money, he was 36% approval rating. After he spent that money, 36% approval rating.
Yeah, but he got more than 70% of his vote in a primary. Would you be concerned? You didn't even get more than 55% in your primary.
More people voted against Dan Patrick than voted for him in the primary. More people voted against Dan Patrick than voted for him in the primary.
How do you do? Okay, I'm obviously missing something. How do you do that math?
If you add up all of the votes for Democrats, plus all of the votes for Scott Milder, who endorsed me, you get a larger number than voted for Dan Patrick.
And your assumption is they're all going to come out and vote against Dan Patrick in November.
Well, I've got a lot of work to do. But let me tell you something. Don't underestimate the retired teachers. Don't underestimate the teachers. Don't underestimate parents. You know, Dan Patrick, if he does spend, I'm sure he's going to spend money, and he's going to put some silly TV commercial with a truck, and he's going to go down to Gelman's and get gloves that he's never worn before, and he's going to say to teachers, I'm going to give you a $10,000 raise, and not one person in the state's going to believe that. And then he's going to say, I'm for lower property taxes, and not one person in the state's going to believe it, and they're going to laugh at him again like they did in the primary, and then they're going to come vote for me. And let me tell you something. I have Republicans that are showing up at my events now, and they're saying to me, I decided a long time ago that I'm going to vote for you because I'm passionate about public education. I just wanted to see you, and I'm going to vote for you, and so are my parents. And everywhere I go in this state, I mean, at the end of the day, if you become a dictator of the Senate and then you take us to a place that we don't want to go, bathrooms, for example. By the way, if Dan Patrick is revving up the bathroom machine again, have you heard this? If he's so worried about bathrooms, he should ban Republican politicians from using them, because more Republican politicians have been caught doing bad things in bathrooms than the entire transgender community.
Okay, before this turns into the Bill Maher show, let me go to questions from the audience. So, sir.
I wanted to thank you for even mentioning environment on your website. Texas year after year becomes hotter, drier, and interrupted by floods, wildfires, and hurricanes, yet it seems our government still pretends that climate change does not exist. How can the state be better prepared to deal with our changing weather and the enormous costs that are involved with that?
That's a wonderful and very important question. Thank you. First of all, climate change is real. I mean, I come from the oil business, and the oil business was the last to admit it, but the oil business admits it. All of the senior executives of all the oil companies were all in the same place. Climate change is real, so we have to act. To me, the way forward is really quite simple. First, we need to convert power generation to natural gas, get rid of coal, because gas burns a lot cleaner. So I consider that sort of economic triage. Plus, it's easy to do because we've got a lot of gas, we've got a lot of infrastructure. Now, we've got to make sure that we don't let methane escape into the air, and that's another issue for another time. Convert to gas-fired generation as quickly as practical, and then Texas should be the leader in terms of renewable energy technology, because that's what we do, is innovate. We understand technology, we understand the energy, we understand how capital works in energy. We've got plenty of wind, we've got plenty of sun, we've got plenty of waves. We should do those things. And all the while, we should hold all of the companies that do business in Texas to the highest standard of protecting our environment, which means we ought to vote for a Democrat on the Railroad Commission, for example. Now, as it relates to storms, and you know, I live in the Houston area, so
right.
We're still getting over Harvey. I say a couple of things. We need, in the old days when Texas was confronted with a disaster, our leaders would act. You can go back to when Galveston was inundated at the turn of the century. We lifted the island. Then in the 50s, we had a terrible drought, and we turned around. Our leaders were progressive, economic progressive leaders, and they said, let's build dams. Now our leaders don't do anything.
You don't think that the state government, Governor Abbott, or your opponent, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, dealt well with the after effects of Harvey?
Well, you got to cut it into two parts. First is, are we ready for the next storm? I mean, that's where my head is now. There's still work to be done in terms of cleanup, but are we ready for the next storm? Certainly not. And I'd point to two areas. We still aren't managing floodwaters, and that's a real problem. And second, we need storm surge protection. If a Category 5 hurricane ever hit the ship channel, and it's never happened, the Houston ship channel, that would be devastating.
Isn't the former issue more for local voters and the latter issue more at the national level, something that Congress would have to deal with?
Well, we see leaders sitting around all doing this, nobody taking action, and that's a big problem.
Well, but aren't the voters of Houston right now in the process of dealing with the question of flood?
Well, I mean, they're not dealing with the Ike Dike, they're not dealing with coastal storm protection.
Right.
Which we should.
And the coastal spine is more of a, you're talking about the coastal spine specifically, but that's really more of a federal issue, is it not?
Well, I think we're all in this together, and I think that the state should, the fact is that nobody's acting.
Would you have taken money out of the rainy day fund, Mr. Collier, had you been Lieutenant Governor, to deal with some of the after effects of Harvey back at the time of the storm?
Almost certainly I would have.
How would you have managed that? I didn't put this on the quiz, but you know what the
Right.
percentage of the Senate that you need to take money out of the rainy day fund?
No, I don't.
2/3.
All right, I was going to guess.
2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate. Would you have been able, as Lieutenant Governor, to have marshaled 2/3 of the votes of a largely Republican Senate to take money out of the rainy day fund?
Well, I think what Dan Patrick showed us is that if you don't try, it doesn't happen. That's the essence of leadership, isn't it?
So you would have been for taking, just so I'm clear on this, you would have drained the rainy day fund for purposes
Well, I think we should
Harvey
not
relief.
drain the rainy day fund. Don't use those words. That's not helpful.
Well, then, then you put in a different word. Tell
But
me
if
what
you
would
step
have
back
done.
and say, okay, we need to move quickly so that we can help people get back to their lives,
Yeah.
which I'm very critical of our state because we didn't act quickly. You know, people who have insurance and have independent means came through it a lot better than people that don't have insurance and don't have independent means. You had a lot of people, mostly poor, that are really suffering and really displaced.
Right.
So the right answer is to roll up your sleeve and solve that problem. You want the federal government to help, be aggressive about it, and if we needed to use rainy day fund money because it's the right and compassionate thing to do, we should have done. I don't know why hoarding the rainy day fund is good policy in the first instance. That makes no sense to me. And it's our money. I mean, here's the deal. That's our money sitting there. Why can't we use it? Now, I don't say drain the rainy day fund. I mean, I think a cushion, the Economic Stabilization Fund, makes sense.
Right.
I also have very bad news for you. I don't think we can use it all. I'm not proposing that we use it all, but we have $11 billion in the rainy day fund. But do you know how much debt we owe just to Wall Street? 5 times that. We owe $50 billion in debt.
So you'd advocate for a one-time withdrawal from the rainy day fund for the purpose of buying down our debt service?
No, I didn't say that, Evan. No, I didn't say that.
Well, I
at
was just
all.
doing A plus B equals C here. Why are you saying that?
Well, I don't think that's not very sensible. What I'm saying is, when you hear Republicans brag about that rainy day fund, how proud they are of that $11 billion, we're not going to touch it because we're proud of it. What they aren't telling you is that a large component of that is pledged as collateral, not directly in a mortgage document, but if you go back to Rick Perry, before he left, he said he thinks that we need about 7.5% of our general revenues salted away, and that's to protect our credit rating. Our credit rating's in trouble. Wall Street has been threatening a credit downgrade. They haven't said that to us directly, but Comptroller Hegar has told us.
Let's take another question from the Travis County Republican Party chair. And
Before we leave water,
Yeah.
there's the other side of water, which is where we're running out. And we really need to solve that problem. You know, we spend a fair amount of time in Hayes County.
5 years since the SWIFT.
Well, the
right?
SWIFT isn't the solution. The SWIFT is, you talk about a Band-Aid on a bullet.
70% of voters supported the ballot initiative.
No, but that didn't solve the problem. The problem is that the groundwater conservation district formulation doesn't work because it still goes back to the rule of capture, big pump rule, modified slightly by groundwater,
Right.
but it's still not the right answer. And so if you own land and you got water under your property and you think that that's your water, it's not your water. A big pump just down dip and there goes your water. So we have a real problem. Conservation, if you go to, there was a report done by the George P. Mitchell Foundation called One Water. I think it's fabulous. That's the direction that we go. And if you study how do you actually solve our freshwater problem, you immediately conclude that it's conservation is the only answer.
San Antonio did a good job on conservation over the last decade. So, Travis County Republican Party chair, campaign manager for the successful Republican who just won the Senate seat, taking a break from dancing alongside Refrigerator Perry in the end zone since the election to come and be with us today. So go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks for being here. Question is about that budget gap that you referenced, which Evan referenced some of the criticism from the comptroller.
Which gap?
Well, you mentioned the $23 billion that you felt that needed.
4 plus 6 plus 5
Yeah,
plus
you did.
6
Well,
plus
it's two-part. It's
Understood. What the question is, you made a commitment, I think, to make the $5 billion loophole your first priority,
Right.
And then you basically signaled openness on some of the other things, raising the gas tax, et cetera. Would a statewide?
no, I said the exact opposite, but carry on. I said
Well,
one
he
thing
did say
only.
he said he wouldn't do it because
I said I would not.
electric vehicles, that it would
All
not
right.
be a practical.
Then
Right.
then thank you for clarifying that.
sir.
I guess the question is, are you open to a state income tax
No.
as a way to do this?
No.
And if not, why
No.
not? Thank you.
No, because Texans don't want it, nor do I. No, that's not the solution. The solution is to reverse these what Republicans have done is shifted the tax burden from big corporations and landed it on the backs of homeowners and small businesses. Whether they've done that deliberately or whether they just don't understand finance doesn't matter to me. That's precisely what has happened, as discussed. So the way to solve that problem is to shift that burden back. And the first step, and the only step that I would take as Lieutenant Governor, is to close that loophole for reasons discussed. Now, the question is, will that solve our revenue problem? I don't know. There's other things that we can do on the spending side. For example, bring back the performance reviews, because we could find an awful lot of opportunities to spend our money more wisely.
So the problem is not just not enough revenue, but also figuring out whether spending is at the right level.
And because we didn't have time to get into it, I also want to reinvigorate the performance reviews, because you can't go to Texans and say, give us money.
Well, we talked
until
about
you're
that during the
satisfied-
controller's race. So I
until
feel
you
like
satisfy them that the money's being spent. However, I can envision a scenario where we close that loophole, we recover those funds, it's 4 years hence, and then we still have a revenue problem. That could very well be the case. Then I'll propose what I think is the right answer. And then I'll get voted in or thrown out. That's the way democracy ought to work.
Good. Well, the way events work is that we end at 9 and we're a little bit past 9. So I want to thank you, Mr. Collier, for being a good sport in your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Appreciate you, sir.
Yeah, that was fun.
Thanks. Very good. Good.
I hope we